Okay, is it working? Yeah, good. Okay, excellent. So let us carry on. So yesterday we were having a look at some of the ideas around freedom and what freedom means in the Dhamma on the Buddhist path. And so the first kind of few days of this retreat, I want to focus on what freedom means. So it's kind of the right view, if you like, how to think about the world, how to think about what is valuable and what is not, etc. So this is kind of setting up the idea of, what we want to do with our lives. And then the second part of the retreat is going to be more practical oriented towards how to achieve that kind of freedom. So as always, the Dhamma always begins with right view, seeing things, understanding things in the right way. And then all the other things, the aspects of practice and what we need to do, they emerge from that idea of right view. Seeing things in the right way leads to a certain way of living, a certain practice, etc. And so I'm going to carry on with that. And today we're going to have a look at, starting off by looking at what is called the Great Chapter. This is from the Mahakandaka, this is from the Vinaya Pitaka. And and again, it's a small little passage on the idea of what freedom is and what the opposite of freedom is. The imprisonment and the oppression and these kind of things. This is a short extract from a very long narrative. The Great Chapter starts off by talking about the Buddha just after his awakening, and then how what happens after his awakening. He starts his teaching career, he considers if he should teach anyone or not, and then the famous story of Brahma Sahampati, this kind of divine being, comes down and asks the Buddha to teach, because he says, if you don't teach all of these beings, they're going to succumb to suffering and dukkha and problems. So please teach, give, let the Dhamma loose in the world, so to speak, to give people an opportunity to get out of suffering, etc. So that's how it begins. So the Vinaya Pitaka itself begins with the life story of the Buddha, and then how that life story then leads on to the Dhamma being expounded, and then the meeting with the first disciples, and how they listen to that Dhamma. And of course, once they decide to become monastics, then you have a Sangha. And then as soon as you have a Sangha, well, then you start to need rules. You need rules about ordination, for example. How are you going to ordain anyone? And so you can see how the things develop after the Buddha's awakening. And this part here is part of that development, part of the how people became monastics and how they became enlightened when the Buddha started teaching here. So after the awakening of the Buddha's first 5 disciples, this happened in the Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta that was mentioned yesterday, the setting in motion, the wheel of the Dhamma, known as the first discourse. And soon after that, the Buddha then carries on his teachings. And one of the people that he teaches is this fellow called Yasa. And so this is the story of Yasa and how Yasa became a monk, and how he became enlightened pretty much at the same time. So the story of Yasa. Yasa means like famous, so his name means famous or something like that. And so I'm not sure if that is an auspicious name or a curse, but anyway, we'll find out as we go through this. So this is the Mahakandaka of the Vinaya Pitaka, and this is where you find quite an elaborate life story of the Buddha, much more elaborate than what you find in the suttas, and this is one of the reasons why it is interesting here. So the Buddha, again, soon after the awakening of his first 5 disciples, after teaching the Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta and then the Anatta Lakkana Sutta, the characteristics of non-self, a very famous discourse through which the first 5 disciples became arahants. And after that, this is like the next part of that story. So at that time in Benares, or Varanasi, if you like, there was a gentleman called Yasa, the son of a wealthy merchant, who had been brought up in great comfort. He had 3 stilt houses, one for the winter, one for the summer, and one for the rainy season. So I don't know if you recognize this narrative, if you like, is very similar to the narrative of the Buddha to be before his awakening. He was also living in 3 stilt houses, one for each of the season. He had also been brought up in great comfort. So it's kind of it's a standard way of talking about someone who lived in luxury for that time in ancient India. This is what luxury meant in those days. So he was the son of a wealthy merchant. And he had all the luxuries in the world. And of course the point with these kind of stories is to make the point that the Dhamma is way beyond any kind of, just because you have a good life doesn't mean you don't choose the Dhamma. The suffering of human beings is largely the same. It doesn't matter if you're wealthy or poor or famous or obscure or whatever. The sufferings, the basic reality of human existence are the same. You're going to die, you're going to get old, you're going to get sick, you're going to be separated from things. And these are oppressive regardless of what station you have in this world. So he had everything he wanted in life. And yet, as we shall see, that was not really satisfactory here. So while Yasa was spending the 4 months of the rainy season in the rainy season house, he was attended on by female musicians, and he did not come down from that house. On one occasion, while he was enjoying himself with worldly pleasures, he felt asleep before his attendants. He then woke up first, while the oil lamp was still burning. He saw his attendants sleeping, one with a lute in her armpit, another with a tabor on her neck, still another with a drum in her armpit, one with hair disheveled, another drooling, still another talking in her sleep. It was like a charnel ground before his very eyes. When he saw this, the downside became clear, and a feeling of repulsion stayed with him. He uttered a heartfelt exclamation, "Oh, the oppression! Oh, the affliction!" I'm not sure what you think about that. It's kind of, the idea here is obviously of someone who has very sharp faculties, one who sees very deeply into something which doesn't seem all that terrible to us. Someone was sleeping and they were a bit disheveled, a kind of a big deal. But here he kind of penetrates and sees much more deeply into what is going on. This becomes like a symbol of all the problems of life. All the problems of probably old age and illness and death ultimately. He sees that through a very minor kind of experience, of very small dukkha, if you like. And so you can sort of get the feeling that now you are, this is kind of very, very unusual, and it's kind of a narrative and it's a story and it's probably slightly mythological, what is happening here, who is telling the story, where does it come from? But it points to something deeper, something very real, and it needs to be compared to what happened to the Buddha to be before the Buddha's awakening, because what the Buddha was reflecting on was old age, illness, and death. Those were his reflections, and those reflections are really what this here is also pointing to. Those are the important ones. These are like pointers towards that again. That's kind of the whole point here. It kind of refers back to the Buddha's experiences before his awakening. And so this is what's happening here, because it's hard to kind of, oh, the oppression, oh, the affliction is kind of a very powerful statement for something that seems fairly innocuous in many ways. So here the heartfelt exclamation is the udana. The udanas are, the Buddha gives these udanas in many places in the suttas. And also there is a whole book, a whole collection of suttas called the Udana, and these are all kind of heartfelt exclamations of the Buddha. They are usually in verse, and there's maybe a little bit of a story around that verse. So this is yasa. So what happens? What do you do when you are kind of overcome by oppression and affliction? Well, this is what he does. He then put on his golden shoes and went to the entrance door. This is kind of the meaning of being brought up in great comfort. You have golden shoes. And then you go to the entrance door. The spirits open the door, thinking no one should create any obstacle for Yasa going forth into homelessness. He went to the town gate, and again it was opened by spirits. He then went to the deer park at Isipatana. So the deer park at Isipatana, that is what is now called Saranath. Saranath is the place you go. This is where the first discourse was taught. The deer park, the Migadaye at Isipatana. And so the Buddha was still staying there because he was still teaching the first 5 disciples. And so for some reason, maybe Yasa knew that there was something happening over there, or maybe he was just drawn towards this place. Maybe he was being led by these spirits. It seems like spirits sometimes have the ability to lead you in the right direction. I don't know if you remember the story of Balika and Tapussa. This is a story which actually comes just before this in this narrative. And these were 2 merchants, and they were traveling around the north of India, and they weren't that far away from the place which was Bodh Gaya, not this place, Benares, but Bodh Gaya. They weren't far away, and then as they were traveling around the north of India, and they had all this merchandise, and one of the things they had was crackers and honey. And so they had crackers and honey as part of their merchandise. They were traveling around, and then this god comes and says to them, actually, there is someone over here just awakened. Go and see this Buddha. So this is kind of what this was a kind of a relative of theirs who was now a god who had understood that the Buddha had awakened in the world. And so they listen to this god, and then they kind of go to the Buddha to offer honey and crackers and this kind of thing. That's kind of handy, to have some relatives who are reborn as gods who can guide you in the right way. So make sure you have some relatives like that. That's kind of very useful. And here we see a similar kind of thing. The relatives, the gods, the spirits open the doors for you, and they kind of guide you maybe in the right direction towards the Buddha, because they have seen something larger. They kind of have a more overview of what's happening in the human realm. So again, it's kind of nice. When the door just opens by itself, that's kind of, wow, the door opens by itself. That's very interesting. There's a spirit opening the door. So if that happens to you, you know that the spirits are looking after you. The door of your kind of house opens up, and you get guided towards, towards Dhammasara or Buddhignana. It's time to ordain, right? Okay, just go forth. And does that happen in real life? And I think the answer is yes, these things can happen. I don't think they kind of happen very often, but they can happen. And the idea here is the idea of like a guardian spirit or a guardian angel. And I think all traditions of spiritual traditions have this idea of some, more powerful beings who sometimes look after you and they guard you. It's certainly found in the suttas. You have the idea of yakas or powerful beings or devas looking after you. But you also have it in other religions. Christianity has this idea of guardian angels, etc. And sometimes you hear stories that sound like that's exactly what is happening. Someone is being looked after by some higher power. And that's kind of neat. It's kind of nice to sometimes feel that something is looking after you in a good way. So how do you get the spirits to look after you? That's the next question. How do you do that? Well, the way to do that is to live really well. And if you live with great purity, and if you have a lot of metta and compassion, and you treat people and beings well, that is when the spirits will look after you, because they rejoice in beings who live well in the world. So if you would like to have some spirits to look after you, then live really, really well. Have a lot of metta, have a lot of compassion, and then the chances are that maybe they will look after you. So that is one side of the story. But the other side of the story is that those beings, those devas, are not really to be trusted. because sometimes they look after you, but sometimes they forget. Sometimes they are so busy playing in the heavenly realm, or maybe they fall asleep or whatever, they forget about you, and suddenly no one is guarding you anymore. So it's kind of nice to be guarded by spirits, but remember, they are beings just like us. They are unreliable, they are uncertain. At the end, it is the Dhamma that is going to guard you, not these spirits. So understand also the limitations of these things. You see around the world, you see people having little shrines in their gardens. Yeah, this is very common. It's common in the Buddhist world. It is common in the Hinduism. It is also common in Christianity. Yeah, people sometimes have these shrines, and these shrines, it's not so common anymore, but it used to be apparently until recently. People would have shrines, and they will make offerings to all kinds of spirits, even within Christianity. And so this is like, again, a universal human phenomenon, wanting to have spirits to look after you. Yeah, it happens everywhere. And so it can be, so this is one way that people do this. But if you really want the spirits to look after you, live well. Don't just offer them things on the shrine. It is usually not enough to to have a real connection. And remember the downside. They are fickle, they are wanton, they are uncertain whether they really will be there when you actually need them. Still, Yasa obviously was looked after by the spirits, and this here then is a sign that he was a very moral and very good person. Yeah, this is how you get looked after by the spirits. This is a kind of a way of saying that this is someone very special, someone who has some higher qualities. And the story that comes after this then kind of makes that point. Yeah, it shows us that he actually did have those higher qualities. So he went to the park at Isipatana, and of course that's where the Buddha was staying. So the story continues. Just then, after getting up early in the morning, the Buddha was doing walking meditation outside. When the Buddha saw Yasa coming, he stepped down from his walking path and sat down on the prepared seat. So Buddha was doing walking meditation, chankama. Chankama is the Pali word. And so that was done already from the earliest days. You see the reference to walking meditation in a number of places in the suttas. Does it ever say what they did while they were doing walking? No, it says nothing about what they did, but they were doing walking. So we can just assume that they would do the same thing as they were doing in sitting meditation. So the Buddha saw Yasa coming, and when he saw Yasa coming, he steps down from his walking path on the prepared seat. And this is kind of the purpose of the Buddha now. He's doing walking meditation, but his main purpose is to teach people. And if he sees someone coming who obviously has the signs of someone who is ready to hear the Dhamma, then the Buddha welcomes them. He kind of comes down from his walking path, gets ready, and he kind of welcomes the people. The idea here is that he is a teacher. That is the main function of the Buddha at this point. As he was getting close to the Buddha, Yasa uttered the same heartfelt exclamation, "Oh, the oppression, oh, the affliction." He has had some kind of insight into dukkha. He has understood dukkha in a profound way. Not just kind of his female attendants drooling drooling. There's more than that. There's some kind of profound insight here. And then the Buddha replies, "This isn't oppressive, Yasa. This isn't afflictive. Come and sit down. I will give you a teaching." Thinking, apparently this isn't oppressive, apparently it's not afflictive, excited and joyful, Yasa removed his shoes, approached the Buddha, bowed and sat down. The promise of freedom from suffering, this is what this is. The idea of freedom again. The idea of the oppression of the world versus the freedom on the Buddhist path. The Buddha says there is an escape. And of course, at that time in ancient India, there was a general respect and understanding that there are people in the world who have an insight into reality, who have an understanding of the ending of suffering. This is kind of part of that society, the way that that world worked. There was a general respect for that. So if there was an ascetic who made that claim, and that claim was reasonable because maybe that ascetic had a reputation, or their outward conduct suggested that they had something special, a special understanding, then you would get excited, you would get joyful. Yeah, wow, the Dhamma, there is Dhamma here, there is real teachings, there's someone who's understood something. And this is again almost like the Dhamma Nusati, the recollection of the Dhamma, the understanding that there is something powerful going on. And if you recall that Dhamma in the right way, the idea is you feel joy because you understand that there is an escape, there is a freedom, there is a liberation from this, there is a way out, there is something higher. And that is a wonderful thing in the world. This is what gives people hope. Yeah, ordinary life, when you look around and you see how difficult it often is, it is just this incredible positive message to hear that there is an escape from all of that. There is a real happiness to be found in the world. This is what the Dhamma is about. Yeah, if you don't have that kind of faith or confidence that there is something more in the world, there is just the ordinary life, then it can all seem pretty kind of, after a while, a bit depressing and sad. There isn't anything higher. And so the fact that there is something higher is something very beautiful and uplifting about that. And straight away, Yasa is elated and joyful because of just hearing that much. And that means that he is ready for a teaching. And so the Buddha then gave him a progressive talk. This is similar to the gradual teaching I was mentioning yesterday, is the Anupubba Kata. Anupubba, along with the former, Kata is talk. And this talk goes as follows. It's on generosity, morality, and heaven. On the downside, the degradation and the defilement of worldly pleasures. And then the Buddha revealed the benefits of renunciation. When the Buddha knew that Yasa's mind was ready, supple, without hindrances, joyful and confident, he revealed the teaching unique to the Buddhas, suffering, its origin, its end, and the path. Just as a clean and stainless cloth absorbs dye properly, so too, while he was sitting right there, Yasa experienced the stainless vision of the truth. Anything that has a beginning has an end. So what is happening here is basically Yasa becoming a stream entry. Yeah, the stainless vision of the truth is the vision that you have at stream entry. That's kind of what this is about. So Yasa becomes a stream entry. So how does that happen? Now, first of all, you may think that this shows that stream entry is quite easy. Yeah, you just sit down, you listen to a talk, and bang, you become a stream entry. You just walk off the street, yeah, come into the meditation hall here. So if you see some people, anyone just walking through the monastery or through the retreat center, and you know, they look like they might be interested in Dhamma, maybe we should invite them in here so they can become stream entries. This is what it looks like in the suttas, and there's many suttas like that. But always, those suttas, they are always, and this is the important point here, they are always narratives. You don't really find many, occasionally you find suttas where someone seems to understand things very quickly, but it's actually very, very rare. One of the rare examples is the Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta, where Kondanya becomes a stream enter fairly quickly. But even there, it seems it took some time. Yeah, it's kind of, you have to kind of look at the suttas and compare it to suttas of other traditions to understand exactly what is going on. But in this case, how can that be? How come these people became stream enters so quickly? And the answer is, and I think this is the right way of looking at this, is that this is a narrative. This is a story. It is shortened down. It is the concise version of events. All the events probably weren't really understood, exactly what happened. So in reality, this probably took much longer. Yasa did eventually become a stream enter, no doubt, or actually not even no doubt, even that is probably uncertain, but probably there was a person like that. Many people became stream enters, obviously, but it would have in reality taken a long time, and sometimes it took years. Yeah, some of the most famous disciples of the Buddha struggled to become enlightened. Yeah, like Anuruddha, Mahamoggallana is also famous for struggling for these things. It took a long time very often. Even the stabilizing the nimitta, the lights in the mind, was often difficult for people to do. And if these people have difficulties with that, then it seems very unlikely that just anyone will become a stream mentor very easily. So this is like a short version of things. Yeah, it is contraction of events that probably took a very long time. It's important to understand these things properly, because otherwise it gives a misunderstanding of how the Dhamma really works. And it gives a sense that maybe at the time of the Buddha it was very easy to get enlightened, but now we're living in the Kala Yuga, the dark times, yeah, when it's very hard to understand the Dhamma, and there's no hope for us, so we might as well pack up and go back to our house and kind of live as best as we can. But that would be the wrong conclusion. Yeah, that would be, you feel a bit dismayed that the modern world is no good for Dhamma practice. But actually, we are just like those people. There isn't really any difference. But coming back to the idea of the progressive talk here, it starts off with generosity. And this is, I think, already very interesting that the whole thing begins with the idea of generosity. Generosity kind of starts you off. Why is that the case? And I think one of the reasons is because it is relatively easy. Yeah, you see in the Buddhist world today, a lot of Buddhists are very generous. They will come and they will support you, or they will, be generous in general. But many of them don't necessarily follow any moral conduct. Morality is like one further step very often. Yeah, it is not so common for people to keep the 5 precepts. Even in Buddhist countries, it's not that common. They may call themselves Buddhists, but they don't necessarily keep the 5 precepts. And so generosity is like the foundation. But it is not just that generosity is a foundation, but generosity also has a lot of the characteristics that evolve or are part of the path all the way to awakening itself. I mentioned that just yesterday, the idea that generosity, when you are generous, you are giving something of yourself, something that you are attached to, something you take to be mine. And that idea of giving up something that is yours is basically what the entire path of Buddhism is about. Awakening experience itself is a final letting go of the sense of me, the sense of belonging or owning things. And so generosity is actually a starting point of that letting go of the me, the I, this is mine. Yeah, so it has a kind of it is very much related to what the Buddhist path is about, the letting go of things, ultimately leading to the complete ending of the sense of I. So for that reason, it is very powerful, a very, very important part of the path. And sometimes we underestimate that. And that is why it comes early. It is easy to be generous. It is more difficult to be generous in a really good way. And to be truly generous in the way recommended by the Buddha, we are just generous because it purifies the mind. It makes you happy. It gives rise to joy and happiness. Well, that can be quite demanding. And that is really the development of generosity over time. And then, based on that generosity, the Buddha then talks about morality, the sila. The sila, which is very profound in Buddhism. And this is why, again, it is often sila leads to samadhi, you will find in the suttas. In other words, deep meditation arises out of morality. It's because it is a very deep kind of morality. When we talk about morality in Buddhism, we don't just mean not doing bad things, we mean doing the good things. We don't mean just doing things, we mean actually thinking things. And so the full morality, which is often called the Tini Sucharitani, the 3 kinds of good conduct, also involves mental morality, the fact that generally your mind is in a good space. It's in a space where you have compassion, where you have a sense of friendliness and kindness for people around you. That is the profundity of morality. And so that's why it becomes such a powerful aspect of the practice and why it matters so enormously. And then comes Heaven, heaven is the next one here. He gives a talk on generosity, morality, and heaven. And that's kind of interesting. Very often you hear that people on the Buddhist path, they say, oh, heaven is a waste of time. Forget about heaven. Who wants to go to heaven? I want to be reborn as a human being. But here the Buddha talks about heaven. So maybe heaven is okay. Otherwise he wouldn't talk about it. It is natural for us to be interested in going to heaven. If you enjoy your breakfast in the morning, did anyone here not enjoy their breakfast? Everyone enjoyed the breakfast, so there you are. So everyone enjoyed the breakfast over here. So if you enjoyed your breakfast in the morning, it means you also want to go to heaven. Because it's the same thing, it's the same inclination of the mind, it's the enjoyment of sensual pleasures. That is what heaven is all about. So if you enjoy, and you should enjoy that, please enjoy your breakfast. If you enjoy the kind of simple pleasures of the world, it means that you're also inclining towards these things. So the Buddha is here saying, actually it's all right to incline towards heaven. It's a natural consequence of being a human being. Of course you incline towards that. That's the way that's to be expected. But then in the very next sentence, he says, he talks about the downside, the degradation and defilement of worldly pleasures. That means now he's saying, don't worry about heaven, forget about heaven. The very next sentence. So in other words, you can see the gradual thing here. In the beginning, of course it is acceptable to aspire towards heaven or to feel that's a good thing. But really, if you want to go really deep on the path, especially if you want meditation to work and you want to enter deep states of samadhi or whatever, then you have to know and understand the downside of the sensual pleasures. And so here you find the samadhi part, the meditation part of this gradual, of this progressive talk. People sometimes say, what happened to samadhi? There's no samadhi here. Well, actually, it is right there. When you understand the defilement of worldly pleasures, then you also understand the benefits of renunciation, which is the next one. You see the downside of worldly pleasures, and the benefits of renunciation is the access to higher kinds of happiness, happiness that go beyond the ordinary things of the world. So the Buddha leads you on stage by stage to that renunciation of the worldly happinesses, leading to samadhi, which is the benefit of renunciation. It is the Nekama Sukha, it is called in the Suttas. Nekama Sukha literally means the happiness of renunciation. And that happiness of renunciation far more powerful than any worldly kind of happiness that you can have. So the Buddha takes you through this. And of course the idea here is that because the Buddha teaches you this, the idea is that the mind of the listener follows along. You go through those steps as the Buddha is teaching them. And so in other words, the mind is taken all the way to samadhi. So samadhi is implied here. And because samadhi is implied, it means that your mind is ready for awakening, because samadhi is always the foundation for awakening experiences. Without samadhi, there is no awakening. Samadhi is called the upanisa for yata bhuta jnanadasana. If you want to see things according to reality, samadhi is the foundation for that. It is found everywhere in the suttas. And samadhi basically means jhanas in the suttas. That's kind of the main meaning of it in the suttas. So then the Buddha knows that your mind is ready, because that mind of samadhi is ready. It is supple, it is without hindrances, it is joyful and confident. The jhanas are called states of confidence. Your mind is fully confident in the object. It is sampasadana is one of the words that is used there for that to describe the second jhana, and that means kind of confidence, if you like. So then when the Buddha knows that your mind is ready, only then does he reveal that teaching which is unique to the Buddhas, and that is the Four Noble Truths: suffering, its origin, its end, and the path. This is what is unique to the teachings, and in that teaching, what is specifically is unique is the idea of non-self. That is the one thing that makes the Dhamma unique in the world. And because your mind is ready, just as a clean and stainless cloth absorbs the dye properly, So too, while he was sitting right there, Vyasa experienced the stainless vision of the truth. If you have a clean cloth, if you have a white cloth and you dye it, the color becomes nice. Nice color comes out beautifully. It absorbs the dye in the right way. It looks the way it is supposed to look. But if it is a dirty cloth and you try to dye it, it doesn't really take the color very well. It comes out really dodgy. In the same way, if you have a dirty mind, your mind is full of kind of impurities, you kind of all over the place or whatever, and then you try to understand the Dhamma doesn't really penetrate properly. The Dhamma comes out distorted in your mind. You don't really understand what is going on. But if your mind is pure, bright and brilliant, entirely pure, and very powerful and joyful, then when you hear the Dhamma is reflected in your mind in the same way that it is taught by the Buddha. It absorbs the Dhamma in the right way, and it understands what the Buddha was teaching. That is kind of the idea here, absorbing the Dhamma in the same way that the cloth absorbs the dye. So your purity of mind is completely required. No defilements can be there. That is why the 5 nivaranas, the 5 hindrances, have to be completely abandoned. Only then can you actually absorb the Dhamma properly. How is that done? Through the jhanas. We will have a look at that in a second, very soon, to see why these are required for this to happen. So now he has experienced the freedom, the freedom from all the oppression that he was having before. And he had seen the vision of the truth. The vision of the truth here is the Dhamma. So here the Dhamma translated as truth, because the word Dhamma has a lot of nuances to it. And that truth is that anything that has a beginning has an end. Everything that arises in the world must also cease. This is that vision. And that vision means that because everything arises, nothing kind of stands on its own. It also means that everything must eventually end. You get born, then you die. You start beginning this realm, you go somewhere else. Nothing is constant. Everything is always changing. That is really what this is about. And that is the insight of stream entry. You have seen the 3 characteristics of existence: impermanence, suffering, and non-self. And by seeing that, you understand how what the world is like, how it works. So that is the teaching, the stream entry of Vyasa. Later on he becomes an arahant, and it gives you an idea of how you start off by understanding dukkha, and by understanding dukkha, then that leads eventually to the freedom from that dukkha down the track. So understanding dukkha is a large part of the path, because then you get the motivation to get out of things, to move in a different direction. So, having looked at that sutta in quite a bit of detail, let us move on to the next one. The next one is called The World, and this is from the Udana, this is from the Khuddaka Nikaya, and so this is Khuddaka Nikaya, the 3rd chapter, Sutta number 10. And so these are then the inspired utterances of the Buddha, or the heartfelt sentiment or heartfelt exclamation or whatever. And this sutta, in a sense, is closely related to the previous one, because this is also about the Buddha soon after his awakening and what happened at that particular time. So it goes as follows. So I have heard, at one time when he was first awakened, the Buddha was staying in Uruvela at the root or at the foot of the tree of awakening, the Bodhi tree, on the bank of the Niranjara river. There the Buddha sat cross-legged for 7 days without moving, experiencing the bliss of freedom. So this is at Bodh Gaya. So Uruvela is where present day is called Bodh Gaya, at the root of the tree of awakening. This is the Bodhi tree, also called the Ficus religiosa. That's the Latin word for it. Ficus is a fig tree. Religiosa is like the religious fig tree, quite literally. And on the bank of the Niranjara river, and of course you can see that river in the present day. It is right there. Then the Buddha sat cross-legged for 7 days without moving, experiencing the bliss of freedom. So the story here is that after his awakening, the Buddha was sitting under one tree, then the next tree, moving along and experiencing the bliss of freedom, but also contemplating the Dhamma that he experienced. And one of the things that he contemplates at this point is dependent origination. And it shows you that dependent origination is at the core of the Dhamma, is at the core of what the Buddha discovered. He discovered why there is suffering, the causes of suffering, and that is explained through dependent origination. Dependent origination comes in many versions. It comes in 12 links or 10 links or 9 or 8 or 7 or 6 or 5, 4, down maybe to 3 links. And the 3-link version is what is found in the Second Noble Truth. The Second Noble Truth is also really about dependent origination. It may not look like it, but when you understand what it says and how it fits with dependent origination, you know that actually that's what it is. It says that craving is the cause of dukkha via rebirth. 3 factors of dependent origination. And dependent origination is just an expansion of that formula. So that too is about dependent origination. So this is what the Buddha is doing, contemplating what he has experienced and also enjoying the bliss of freedom. So this gives you an idea of how powerful that bliss is. You can sit cross-legged for 7 days without moving. I don't know if you ever tried that, but if you try that, you are probably not going to succeed, because that is very, very hard to do, to sit cross-legged for 7 days without moving, unless you have some kind of bliss that is super-duper powerful, that kind of keeps you going there. So that bliss of awakening is incredibly, incredibly powerful. And that is why you can have this kind of meditation. You abandoning all the defilements, having the insight into the nature of reality, and it changes you as a person in a very profound way. If you were to see a Buddha like that, someone soon after the awakening, it would be like, wow, what happened? This is amazing. You look like something else. There's a famous story that you find in the Majjhima Nikaya 26, the Aryapariyesana Sutta, the Noble Search. And in that Noble Search Sutta, there is the wanderer, Upaka, Najivaka Upaka, who meets the Buddha. And he looks at the Buddha and he says, wow, your faculties are so pure. What happened to you? Who is your teacher? What's going on? And so there's this feeling that someone, soon after their awakening, something has happened to them that is so profound that the whole appearance is changed. You can see that something really happened to this person. And so this is one of those things, is that the inner qualities are expressed also through the outer qualities. This is how we can know, at least partly know, that there are such things as awakening and deep meditations in the world, because it changes people. So anyway, when 7 days had passed, the Buddha emerged from that state of stillness and surveyed the world with the eye of the Buddha. He saw sentient beings tormented with many torments and burning with many fevers, born of greed, hate and delusion, or born of desire, ill will and confusion, if you like. The Buddha just reflected on the world and he saw the reality of the world. It was not only he that had kind of come from a background of wanting to find an end of suffering, but this is a universal reality in the world. Everyone is tormented. Every time you have some dukkha in your life that you don't want, that's a kind of torment. And that happens all the time. There's always a few things we don't like. Life was full of tormentation. Not sure if that's a word, but anyway, that's a word now. So full of, and it is the burning of the defilements in the mind. When you have that defilements in the mind, they compel you to do things. They drive you on. They burn you. They sear you within. And this is the problem. He sees this in the world. And then when he sees this, then he kind of he comes out with this powerful expression of the problem in the world. So he sees the lack of freedom, the torment, and then he talks about the opposite, which is a freedom from that. Then understanding this matter, on that occasion the Buddha expressed this heartfelt sentiment. This world, born in torment, overcome by contact, speaks of disease as the self. For whatever it thinks it is, it turns out to be something else. The world is attached to existence or continued existence, overcome by continued existence, taking pleasure only in continued existence. Yet it becomes something else. What it enjoys, that is the fear. What is fear, that is the suffering. But the spiritual life is led in order to give up continued existence. So this world is born in torment, or you could say it is born into torment, or you could say it is born from torment. The torment of craving actually gives rise to more torment in the future. So the birth that you have, it comes from torment, it drives more torment. It is all about torment, all about dukkha. Here's just another word for dukkha, really, that is being used here. Overcome by contact, the world speaks of disease as the self. Overcome by contact, because we are contacting the world, because we live in the world, we experience the world in such a way that we see a self there. The contact is where the self arises. It arises as long as we have experience, and we experience this self. But the problem is that that thing that we take to be a self actually is a problem. That thing which we grasp onto, we hold onto as the me, the dear me, the I, the kind of the thing that is closest to us in the world, that actually is problematic. That is impermanent and unreliable and will always let you down. And so this self, maybe if it always lets you down, maybe it isn't a self. Maybe it is not worth holding on to. Maybe it doesn't have the value that we give it. When you kind of protect yourself, this is me, this is my things, maybe there's an illusion lurking there somewhere, because it always lets you down at the end of the day. For whatever it thinks it is, it turns out to be something else. There's one of those beautiful sayings in the suttas, yena yena himanyanti tatta anyata bhavya, something like that. I can't remember the exact phrasing there. So for whatever you think it is always something else. What do you take to be you? What is it that you cherish? How do you identify with? Maybe you think of yourself as a Buddhist. Maybe you think of yourself as a virtuous person. Maybe you think of yourself as happy. Maybe you think of yourself as compassionate. And one day, the compassion is not there. One day you wake up and you feel a bit cold. You don't have any compassion inside of yourself. And then you kind of lament, what happened to my compassion? I used to be so compassionate. It's gone. And then the next day the compassion comes back again, because it kind of goes in cycles like that. We are not constant as human beings. One day you feel very kind, you want to help people. Another day you don't feel particularly kind. Actually you're a bit irritated by everyone. And this is kind of how it goes. But we attach to these senses of who we are, these identities that we have. And sometimes they are much more superficial than what I was just saying now. Sometimes it's more about wealth, it's about education, it's about status, it's about all of these kind of things. That is far more superficial. At the very least, if you identify as someone who is a good person, at least you are on the right track. You're identifying in the right way with something that ultimately leads out of identity altogether. But whatever it is that you identify with, it is going to change. You can't hold on to it. It is always going to move on. And for that reason, it is really inherently problematic. And so we want to practice the spiritual path in the right way. That does not mean that you should give up identity straight away. In fact, it is impossible to do that. So the right way to understand this is that we gradually move to a higher kind of identity, an identity that is more conducive for the path to develop. So you move away from the identity of foolish things like identity with possessions and identity with all of these other things, and you identify maybe instead as a spiritual practitioner, as someone who at least tries to be kind. Even though you cannot always be kind, you try to be kind. You try to be compassionate. You try to be understanding. And then you are on the right track. That is the right way to think about these things. It does not mean that you kind of just chuck out identity. Why? Because that is impossible. You can't do that. You just take up some other identity instead, probably a worse one. So then the Buddha goes on, the world is attached to continued existence, overcome by continued existence, taking pleasure only in continued existence, yet it becomes something else. The same thing again, we attach to existence. Existence here means a particular way of existing. Bhava means existence or continued existence, but it also means that we want to be certain things. We identify in certain ways, and that's what we are attached to, a particular way of being. And yet, as you were just saying, you become something else. What it enjoys, that is dangerous. We enjoy things, we delight in things, and those things that we delight in, they're actually dangerous. It is fearsome. Why? Because it becomes otherwise. And because it is dangerous, it ends up becoming suffering. You cling on to some idea of who you are, and then when it changes, you suffer accordingly. But this spiritual life is led in order to give up continued existence, in order to give up this idea of bhava, in order to give up this idea of identity, because really there is nothing that you can identify with that actually is going to be lasting and going to be useful and purposeful for you. So, the Buddha then says, of the ascetics and Brahmins who say that through continued existence one is freed from continued existence, none are themselves freed from continued existence, I say. Of the ascetics and Brahmins who say that through annihilation of existence one escapes from continued existence, none have themselves escaped from continued existence, I say. So this is the wrong way to escape from continued existence. The idea here is that you have two ways, the two kind of standard ways that people think about the world. And one is the eternalist doctrine that you carry on, and by carrying on, like with eternally, you kind of become one with Brahma, one with God, or whatever it is. And through that, you kind of escape from this whole samsaric round of existence. The Buddha says you're not actually freed from existence in that way. It's the wrong way of going about it. You can't escape the problem of existence through eternalism. That's what they're saying. In fact, what you're doing instead, you are clinging on to some other existence. That's really what you're doing. And so you're carrying on in the same problem as you had before. And of course, then the opposite is then the idea that you will be annihilated when you die. It is the end of everything. You escape from existence through annihilation. But even those people who have that view also are not actually freed from existence. It's not what we believe. It is about what the reality is. And very often we confuse belief and reality. Belief and reality are not the same thing. We need to know what is going on. And this is kind of the idea of right view. The Buddha presents to us the reality that the way the world works is that as long as you want that existence, or even if you don't want it, you're going to get it regardless, and you will carry on, but that existence will not be what you want it to be. You will get existence, but not the kind you wanted, and that is the issue. And even though you want to be annihilated at the end of your life, that is not going to happen. Even though you want to carry on forever, it's not going to happen, because the world carries on according to dependent origination. And dependent origination is the right way of looking at the world, says the Buddha. And that is the way how to think to be able to get out of this. And so freedom is a very profound thing. It's very difficult to find the way of freedom. Yeah, it takes that kind of very special insight into the nature of reality. If you look at the way that the world works, and has always worked, it tends between those two extremes, eternalism and annihilationism. Yeah, this is kind of, look at almost all religions in the world. Look at people who are not religious, who are atheists. Yeah, either they are annihilationists, everything comes to an end when you die, or they are eternalists. Almost the whole world is like that. And the Buddha is really the exception. If you want to find a way out, you want to find that middle way, the middle solution, the thing that kind of lies somewhere in the middle there, that is called dependent origination. And that is where the escape is found from this whole round of existence. And that is really what the Buddha is saying here. This is where freedom is found, and that is the path we should be on. And that is what we're going to carry on talking about this afternoon. So we'll see you back again at 3 o'clock. In the meantime, please enjoy a nice lunch, and that's it for now.
So